Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. For today's episode, we are going to discuss the quality of relentlessness. And this is really a quality or characteristic that I think people in general, and certainly tennis players, ought to strive for within their games, within their lives. And really what it is it's the ability to keep rising, to keep getting up when you fall, to keep pushing through. And to me, sort of a combination of, work ethic, resilience, grit, sort of a combination, probably some other qualities we could throw into the mix as well. But, really this ability to keep rising, to keep fighting back no matter what is thrown your way. And I think today we'll talk about this quality in a few different ways. Talk about a little bit about what it is, and maybe certain people in history and currently that really embody that. And we'll talk a little bit about what seems to get in the way of people being as relentless as they'd like to be, and then offer some suggestions and tips that players, coaches, parents can think about and try to apply as much as possible.
So I think that's a good structure for today, Josh. So let's get into a little bit more on the what it is. You came up with some great words that correspond to relentlessness. I think some others could be more around like persistence, perseverance. When I think of being relentless in a sport like tennis, I think about someone who plays every point with great effort, regardless, great effort, great intensity, great fight, playing their game, doing all the right things, regardless of what the score is. So, and I think those players are very dangerous to play because you might be up 40-love on your serve and you're playing this player who is known for being relentless. 40-love is not necessarily a safe lead. And you feel that. And when we think about players in history, certainly more recent history, Rafael Nadal is someone who has been described as relentless by many of his peers and by many commentators, and that is a factor in playing him, that it makes him difficult to play because he does that, and he's also extremely willing to play long points and very willing to play long matches. If you look at his career, there are a lot of long, epic matches. He's won many of them, and he's lost a few, but he's really willing to go there. And that can be tough when you're playing someone who is giving his best effort throughout a match like that. So, this is something certainly to strive for, but it's certainly also not easy to do. And part of the inspiration for today's topic is a book by Harvey Dorfman, who did a lot of work in Major League Baseball. This book is called Coaching the Mental Game. And just sort of a little side note on this, Josh, I think it seems like sports psychology has been around a long time in baseball, mental coaching. And if there are listeners who are interested in reading some books on mental toughness, some of the best books on mental toughness come from baseball. So even if you're from Europe or a country in which baseball is not as popular, there are some really good things from the baseball world that can be applied. And it's funny how even this book here, Dorfman is making it more generic, even though the majority of his experience is with baseball. So this is really kind of a cool book because part of it is he has these two sections of it called the A to Z's of like the mental game. And one's for coaches and one's for athletes. And so this relentless piece is part of the athlete section. And it has some really good stuff. And some of it we're going to cover today, but would definitely recommend people getting this type of book, Coaching the Mental Game. For those of you on YouTube or Spotify video, you can see this. As it's super easy to read because you can just pick different topics. You don't have to read it from page 1 through page whatever. So, Josh, other thoughts on what relentlessness means? Maybe some, in your opinion, some other athletes or tennis players who have embodied this perspective.
Yeah, so actually, and one thing I wanted to add, and I'm glad that you brought that up about baseball, because I actually see, and people, I think when people generally think about tennis and sports most similar to tennis, I think it tends to be, for obvious reasons, racket sports, right?
Yeah.
Table tennis, pickleball, squash, badminton, racquetball, padel, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there really are a lot of similarities with baseball. I mean, pitching and catching, I think, are, actually, sorry, pitching and hitting, I would say are very similar to serving and returning. Baseball is also very much a sport of failure, you could say, or mistakes. There's sort of the old quote that if somebody's successful 3 out of 10 times, they can be a Hall of Famer. And you can have an amazing career with being a 300 hitter. And tennis is, a little different in that way, but we've talked about how if you're winning, let's say 55% of your points, which is right around where many of the top WTA and ATP players are winning, then you can have a fantastic career. You don't have to win 90 or 80%. So I think there really are a lot of similarities here. And I think also, yeah, I mean, a book that really comes to mind for me is Heads Up Baseball by Ken Ravizza. And I know I've talked about and we have talked about him. I had the opportunity to meet him a couple times when I was living out in California. And yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. So, I think there's certainly a lot of great tennis sports psychology books, but if people are looking to broaden their horizons in certain ways, definitely some other resources that are out there. But yeah, in terms of what your question about maybe certain players, yes, I think Nadal certainly comes to mind. I think in general, to me, it really is a lot of the top players throughout history and currently that really um, I would describe as being the most relentless. And I think the reason why is because, whether we think about a Nadal or a Djokovic or a Serena or Federer or, we could think about Swiatek and Sabalenka currently, Coco, whoever else we want to add. Um, I think with every single one of them, we can think about matches where they haven't been at their best. They've lost the first set. Maybe on the men's side, they've lost the first 2 sets. We can think about certain matches in particular. With Nadal, I can think back to his final, I think it was the 2022 Australian Open final with Medvedev, where he was down, I think, 2 sets and on the brink of being down a break in the third set. I think serving at love 40, I think 2-3, something like that. I remember a match where he played against Dominic Thiem, lost the first set 6-love, ended up winning in 5 sets. Djokovic too. I mean, it's the same type of thing where he loses a set and everyone's thinking, okay, we know he's going to try to fight back here. It's a matter of when, not if. And I think these top players, and again, all of them really have their examples of this, but I think these top players, to me, this is one of the main ways that the top players in the world separate themselves from the rest of the pack. Again, maybe the rest of the pack being the top 30, top 50, whatever, wherever we want to draw that line, Where to me, if we're comparing a top three, top five player to somebody who is in that top 30, top 50 range, one of the biggest differences, and I'd love to see some statistics on this actually, is their ability to win after being down, win after maybe losing a first set, maybe losing a set and being down a break even, right? And I think even just being able to, I know Craig O'Shaughnessy, he does a lot of great work in the statistics of tennis, and it would be very interesting to see and maybe compare certain players. Okay, what percent of the time do they win the second set after losing the first? Because I think we see it all the time outside of the top levels of the sport, right? I think people can think back to their own matches, and think, okay, when I'm not at my best, what do I do? Okay, when I've lost the first set, do I say, okay, I guess it's not my day? Do I get upset? Do I look for an excuse? Do I tank? Or do I dig in? Do I choose to be relentless in those moments? Do I use the tools that I have in order to be resilient, relentless, persevere in those moments? And I think it really can be seen as a skill. And we could talk about how we build that skill and what that looks like. And I think it's, a combination of tools that are involved with that, um, and experience, frankly. I don't think any player, as they're just starting to play the game, necessarily starts with that level of relentlessness like we're talking about. But I think, yeah, being able to look at the best in the world, understanding that that's one of the reasons why they're ranked where they are, why they have the accolades that they are. And then also just be able to maybe think back to certain moments where we have exhibited this trait more or less, and maybe try to understand what could have gone differently in some of those moments. And then, yeah, try to, if we can view it as a skill, try to understand, okay, what needs to be done in order to build on that, in order to learn from our experiences, and how can we start taking steps in that direction?
Yeah, and I think there might be different flavors of relentlessness or how to practice this for different players. Let's stick with maybe Nadal and Djokovic for a moment. So I think when we describe the Nadal relentlessness piece, it's more about you playing the same really hard style point after point. Maybe less of that now because of his health, but certainly between 2004 and 2010, you were in for some really tough points no matter what the score was. He did not give games away. Again, that may be different now. He might let some games go or let some points go, but back then, no. That made him really hard to play. And so I think for him, it was like this maniacal focus on simply making every point really hard for his opponent. And doing that point after point after point, no matter what the score is. I think with Djokovic, I think of his relentlessness more in terms of he never thinks he's out of it. Like there's that self-belief that he can always climb back. And part of that probably comes with his mental preparation around visualizing difficult situations and seeing himself emerge successfully from those. And I think that the 2019 Wimbledon final against Federer was a prime example of that. Federer is serving for the match. He's up 2 match points, 40-15. And what does Novak say to himself? He reminds himself that he belongs in this position and that he's better than the other guy. So that allowed him to wriggle free of this very difficult situation and then pursue the match to its end, in which he eventually won. So I think, we want to think about some of the ingredients that go into being relentless, and they may differ for some people. I like the Nadal one, what he does. Not that Nadal doesn't have this belief in winning, but he doesn't talk about that. I would say more as publicly as, say, a Djokovic or a Federer would talk about that. He's been more about almost a do your job style. And I think that's kind of maybe from his uncle Tony, the way they developed his game. It was simply around play this way, give your great effort, do it all the time. And then we see where that goes. We let that add up. And in the end, we believe the numbers will fall in our favor. So that's certainly one way to do it. It's an admirable way to do it. Maybe not everybody's game is for that. So I think self-belief, effort also go into these things. And if we get into the challenges, Josh, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for players is, you know, the specter of the outcome, winning, losing, and how that affects one's mindset and how it can affect effort and belief, maybe hope and optimism. Um, because even if you're
Attitude.
up, yeah, 5-0 40 love, that's not the time to let down per se. And um, it's also if you're down 5-0 40 love, it's make them prove it. We were talking about parallels with baseball. When we had Howard Bryant on, he mentioned that the thing that he loved about baseball and tennis is that in both sports you have to finish. And we have to keep that in mind when we're on the maybe the wrong side of the scoreboard, is that if we can be relentless, maybe we can come back from that moment. The clock won't be something to end it. So I think there are lots of challenges for different players, and I think everyone has to kind of think of it themselves. What has prevented me from being as relentless as I could? What has changed my focus level? What has changed my effort level at times? Um, whether that's beginning of the match, middle of the match, end of a set, end of a match. There are probably everybody who's listening has had challenges to this idea that we've been distracted by something, often related to the score. Even if it's other people, it's related to the score or performance. So, what are those things for you? And can we start to look at them perhaps a bit differently, and begin to value what relentlessness brings for us to this process?
Yeah. And I think that, yeah, I would agree that results and sort of focusing on the results tends to be the biggest thing that gets in the way. And I think that this can look a lot of different ways, right? This can look like a player focusing on their UTR. This can look like a player focusing on what other people might think about their UTR or their result, or something like that. This could have to do with somebody thinking about the consequences of winning or losing a match. Okay, am I going to move up or down in the lineup? Am I going to be taken out of the lineup? Am I going to, what are people on my USTA league team going to think? So I think it takes many shapes and forms, but it does often relate to results in some way or another. Yeah, and I think that, yeah, just being able to recognize, am I doing everything that I possibly can do right now? So to me, it has a lot to do with also being present, right? If we're focusing on results, then we are, generally thinking about the future, thinking about what could happen, what might happen, what are other people going to say or think, you know, things like that. Or where maybe it is 5-0 40 love and we're stuck in the past. Oh, well, why, I can't believe I've been playing this way. My opponent made that line call last game that I know my shot was, I know my forehand down line was in and they called it out. Oh, maybe I should have gotten more sleep last night. So it's very easy to not be present, to be stuck in the past or the future, which I think tends to happen to people, more often than not, you could say. And I think that also can be one of the biggest factors that gets in the way of us, of us really embodying this trait or characteristic as much as we want to.
Yeah. And like we were just saying, this is not easy. If we want to work on this as a skill, and looking at and the skills that are around it too, like some of the things that we've discussed. I guess I'll throw one more extra thing in there, Josh, is that if you're going to be relentless, you also have to have a certain level of trust in your own game, that this is a game that can be successful. And I think when we look at the pro level, what do we see? We see guys who are yeah, pretty much good at everything, but then they also have like super strengths. They have some world class things that they do, and that's what differentiates them from other people. And they know that, when I highlight my super strengths, that gives me a great chance to do something. And I think it's about, for us, as players, we want to understand, all right, really, I have to have intense trust in my game. And I have to have intense trust if I play my game on as many points as I can, good things will happen. And it's almost like, right, you got to believe that. You have to believe that being relentless is going to lead to something positive. It might not happen, right? But thinking that way is way more productive than being more pessimistic about the whole thing. So I think there is also a level of trusting the game that you're playing, and trying to really buy into that, and play it on as many points as you can, and if you can do that sort of Rafa style, regardless of the score, regardless of the situation, more often than not, good things are going to happen to you out there.
I totally agree. And I think I think it's important how we frame this too, where good things are going to happen to us. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to win. I think that could mean other good things happen to us, right? Maybe it's 5-0 40 love in the third set, and we come back and we bring it back to 5-all, and we lose the match 7-5. I think we can look back at that and say, wow, look at the way I fought there. Look at the way I came back. To me, there's a lot of positives to take away from that. Maybe we'll also think about how we got ourselves into that hole in the first place, and maybe there are some things to learn from that. But I think it actually reminds me of something we were just talking about when we had our episode on optimism, where it's, we want to embody the types of traits like relentlessness and like optimism that tend to, that are part of our process and tend to lead to the types of results that we want. Do they guarantee success? Do they guarantee we're going to win? No. But I think they increase our chances. They give us the best possible chance to perform the way that we want to. Does that mean we're not going to have bad days or we're not going to lose matches? No. But we're increasing our chances. We're controlling what we can control by focusing on some of these different qualities.
And I think striving to become a relentless competitor is really, I think, is a really good part of anybody's tennis project. I like to bring it back to like this the Stoic principle of the inner citadel, which I like to call your inner fortress of mental toughness, or however you want to phrase that. And someone who's relentless has this really strong fortress that no matter what's going on, making errors, losing points, winning points, whatever is happening out there, maybe even your opponent is cheating, people are watching, heckling you, that this fortress just remains really strong. It's not built out of, a house of cards. It's built from the heaviest and strongest stone, and you shoot an arrow at it, it just bounces right off, right? And there's like some tolerance there for whatever's going on around you. And I think we've talked about tolerance, Josh, in different ways. And I think one has to be, as a tennis player, tolerant of losing points, because it's normal. To be tolerant of making some mistakes, it's normal. Tolerant maybe of just feeling a bit of frustration and being able to deal with that. And if you can have strong tolerance, have this strong fortress of mental toughness, it just becomes easier to channel all of your efforts into productive action. And productive action is really the relentless part, that we're relentlessly playing with positive intent. We're doing things that are productive toward what we want. And the more we do that, the better. So I think this idea of like striving or trying to become this relentless competitor is a really worthy goal. And we've got some tips here for how to develop that. And I would love to see people or hear about people actively developing this as a skill. So, should we just go through a couple of these tips, Josh, and just kind of talk back and forth about them? So, the first one is, and this is something a player can do, a parent can do, a coach can do, but emphasize playing all the way to the end of the match.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think, what it does is it gives you a chance. Does it guarantee anything? No. But you give yourself a chance, right? Anything can happen. If you continue fighting to the end, more likely than not, you're going to extend the match, right? Assuming you're losing. You're going to extend the match. Anything can happen. Your opponent can get tight. Your opponent's level can drop. Injuries can happen. Fatigue can happen. All sorts of things can happen. Your opponent can get frustrated and start tanking or start, getting tight trying to close out a match, which we know happens a lot. Anything can happen, but only if we give ourselves a fighting chance by sticking around long enough for that to potentially happen. And what that looks like is us continuing to fight to the end, knowing that the chance is never zero. The chance is never zero. It's not it's not like a sport like football or basketball or soccer where you can literally run out the clock because there is a clock. Tennis, more often than not, I know there's some specific examples where people do play with a clock, but more often than not, almost always there's not a clock. It's about, one player has to finish the match out, or and yeah, and I think by continuing to fight to the end, you give yourself a chance for things to start to change.
And I think one challenge we did not bring up, but is very common, is this notion of feeling satisfied at a certain point in the match. Yeah, oh, it's 4-all. I lost the first set 6-4. It's 4-all in the second. Yeah, that's a respectable score. And then all of a sudden, you're not really fighting for it anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you may come off feeling okay about yourself because you played maybe this better player to 6-4, 6-4, but you didn't fight all the way to the end. You were happy to get 4 games and your opponent wanted 6, so your opponent's going to get 6. So that, I think, is another application of this, is to not only when we're like really, really down, but maybe when we're really in the match, can you be relentless enough to go for it, to understand you have a chance here, and let's play all the way to the end. So I think that's something we can be emphasizing as coaches with our players. Next one is developing a philosophy that recognizes relentlessness as a behavior to be proud of, and then rating that. And I think that's when we start to maybe develop some of the virtues of a great competitor. This should probably go on there. And I think measuring some virtues as a player is a good idea. And so even when we're doing debriefs with players, we obviously want to keep a lot of that not about the result and keep it more about what we did. And we could make relentlessness a scale to measure out there, so that we're tracking it as a skill. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, Josh, on having players recognize this as a very specific behavior they should strive for and be proud of when they do it.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. I think it's important to be able to define what that is to make it easier for a player to judge themselves based on it. And yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, we've talked about the reflection process and the importance of people going through a process like that, whether that's alone or with a coach or a sports psychology professional. I think there are benefits for somebody to at least start that process by themselves before maybe somebody else starts to give their opinion or their thoughts. But yeah, no, I think that is really important so that people can learn from each performance that they have, and so that they can think about what they did really well and what they did out there that was relentless. Again, if you play a 2.5 hour match, most of the time there's going to be certain moments where you embody that trait, and other moments where maybe not as much. And I think that that's also very normal, right? It's not generally going to be a that variable is not always going to be consistent throughout that the duration of that time. So I think just being able to reflect on it and okay, how did I do with this? Okay, in the first set, maybe the first few games, what was going on there related to relentlessness? Okay, in that first set tiebreaker. Okay, in that second set, that third set, so on. But yeah, I think it's really important to be able to reflect on that and to make that a variable that people can judge themselves on and hope to improve on over time.
And I think we can practice it in practice, certainly with point play, but we can practice it through effort, having really hard drills in which perhaps a player is presented an opportunity to quit or stop and encouraging them not to, or even just something as simple as play every ball, run everything down. Doesn't matter if it's going to land in or out. Can you just chase down every ball? No ball bounces twice in practice. And now you're starting to build a level of persistence or just effort to get everything, a never quit on any ball type of attitude that can start to develop this a little bit. So, I think as coaches, we want to be very aware of how are we building this relentless piece, because there's an effort part of it, there's a persistence part of it, and so we want to make sure we're being creative outside of just point play. The point play is putting it all together, but how are we getting them to be relentless, players to be relentless going into point play? Curious on your thoughts on this, but we should emphasize executing or playing your game should have nothing to do with the situation or score.
Ideally, yes. I do.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think that's always easy to do. I think that that's certainly the standard we should be aiming for. But I think it's challenging, and I think even acknowledging two players that's challenging, right? If you're having a conversation with somebody and somebody's talking about, oh well, it was the third set 10-point tiebreaker, and so I was really trying to not miss. Be like, hey, I get where that comes from, and I've been there too, certainly. To be totally frank. Um, but also, yeah, trying to understand we're trying to play our best way. We're trying to bring out our best version of our games. And really, it doesn't matter what the score is. We want to bring out the version of our games where we feel confident that we're going to play best. And trying to bring that out regardless of score, I think is certainly something to strive for.
Yeah, and I think about the matches that I kind of have the most regret about. There are ones in which I didn't do this. And it
Me too.
wasn't, right? Yeah, it was more, I don't know, even know if it was necessarily score related. It might even been opponent related at times. Not enough respect for the opponent. Therefore, I played passively, which could maybe be thinking, all right, I was assuming I was going to win or something. Um, so that's been more of a challenge for me sometimes. That's what leads me not to play my game, or I just forget my game at times, and what that really is. And the times I've been most proud have been the times where I have been this kind of relentless competitor, playing my game point after point, um, you know, being more creative, being dictating, using my strengths more, and feeling the belief, knowing that if I do this, good things are going to happen. So, yeah, that is an ideal. And maybe there are times where we have to slightly change our game, within the confines of what our A game is. I don't definitely not a proponent of going from you're a great aggressive baseliner, now you should start serving and volleying because you're losing if you don't know how to serve and volley. But I think this is the ideal. This is what you see Nadal do. You mentioned the match where he lost 6-0 in the first set to Dominic Thiem in the 2018 US Open. He did make a change, but it was like a positioning change. He stepped up into the court a little bit more. He still played his game, and in fact just played his game better at that moment. So, and then it went, I think 7-6 in the fifth, and he won. So the last tip that we have for players and coaches is this understanding that developing relentlessness it's a process. It will take time. Um, the whole goal is to do the work, with diligence, to do it on a consistent basis. So it's something that should be looked at daily in training. Um, trained perhaps just like you're training your cross courts and you're down the lines or whatever kind of thing. And, similar maybe to what we said in our episode on the Stockdale paradox, it might take longer than you expect. We all wish these things could just happen in a day, right, Josh? But it takes some time to really practice these skills and even the mental skills, because we're often dealing with patterns of thought that are very deep and ingrained in how we do things, and changing those, taking some energy away from those deep ingrained patterns of thought and bringing them to a new pattern of thought is not necessarily going to be a quick thing.
And in a certain way, I think actually there is it's a process, and I would say it's necessary to go through those trials and tribulations of successes and failures. And maybe we can reframe how we see that. But I think that when we're able to have a match where we weren't particularly relentless, where we look back at it, we reflect on it, and we're like, you know what? I could have done better there. That second set, I lost the first set. Second set, it was close, and then I kind of faded away. And in hindsight, I probably could have done better. And again, I've been there. I probably most people have. But I think it's in a certain way, it's essential to have those experiences so that you can learn from them, so that you can sit with, how does that feel? How does it feel to have a match where you didn't necessarily give it your all the whole time, right? You gave it your all for 80% of it. Okay, but how about that final 20% when the match was on the line, where you faded? And maybe you faded physically, or maybe mentally, right? Maybe mentally you weren't as relentless as you wanted to be. So I think yeah, having different situations like that happen, different ups and downs, makes us, or can make us, into the relentless competitor that we strive to be, the ultimate competitor ultimately, because it's not, nobody is just out there winning all the time. No one's out there winning all the points, right? We've talked about that 55% statistic quite a bit, and it's true. You're going to lose points. You're going to lose games. You're going to lose matches. You're going to have slumps. But if you're not ready to handle that and to honestly reflect on that, then it's really hard to turn that around. And I think what it means to be relentless, and what it means to be a great competitor, and what ultimately the best in the world do, is they deal with it. They deal with it, and they're the best at dealing with it. And that's, again, one of the main reasons why they're the best players in the world. So I think, we can all try to think about how we can just get a bit better at this skill of, getting back up when we fall, or rising after we're struck down, or, however we want to frame it, but being able to keep getting back up and keep, just keep getting back on that horse after each time we fall off, or after, whatever ends up happening out there, I think is really what we all want to be aiming for.
Yeah, because the journey continues. And I think as you do the reflection, it's important to be kind and compassionate with yourself, non-judgmental, and recognize that we're playing for the person that we're becoming, the player that we're becoming. You mentioned the kind of the success and the failure piece. I've been sharing recently a lot with my clients the Kobe Bryant idea of that failure doesn't exist, because there's always another opportunity. It's always about learning and moving forward. And the only way you really fail is if you just stop.
Mm-hmm.
Then the journey ends. And when maybe it ends at a place where it shouldn't have. And so the more that we're looking at relentlessness as something we are building and building and building for the player we are becoming. Yeah, like you said, Josh, maybe the 20% of that match wasn't wasn't so relentless. Okay, it is what it is. How do we learn from that? How do we move on? It's not a failure. This is the process of competition continues. The process of development continues, and we go along with that. So I think it's one of the great qualities for becoming a great competitor in tennis, and I think also when we look at tennis as training for life, certainly relentlessness in the pursuit of other things in our lives that are important is a great way to practice that particular topic, right? So, well, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.